Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. And welcome to Africans Live at the Waterhole. My name is Ben Coley, and I will be taking you through the next couple of hours whilst we investigate what is going on at some of the myriad of camera locations that we have across Africa, East and Southern Africa, and hopefully we will have some fantastic things to see. Don't forget, this is a live and interactive experience, and you can watch us on our app. And if you're watching on the website, don't forget you can register. Ask any questions of me that you might have. Let me know what you're up to, what you'd like to see, what you've enjoyed seeing so far. And I and we would be delighted to hear from you as often as possible. And it looks like we've started out at Campus Dam up in Kimberley with our colony of lesser flamingos, which is always pretty amazing to see. Now, flamingos are not a bird that I see particularly regularly. I spend most of my time within the Kruger area. I've spent some time in East Africa and a little bit of time in other countries as well. But I've never seen flocks of flamingos. It's a nice alliteration that we do tend to see here at Campus Dam. Of course, there's an enormous colony up there, and this is a relatively new camera. This is actually my first time of viewing it, so I'm excited to see what these flamingos might be getting up to. Now, there are two species of flamingo that we find in southern Africa, at least the lesser flamingo and the greater flamingo. And these are the lesser flamingos, characterized by those bills that you can see, a lot pinker with the black tip at the bottom. And as the name would suggest, slightly smaller than the greater flamingos. It's not impossible to see a couple of greaters in amongst the lessers, but the majority of these will be lessers. And those look like, trying to think again what we would get there, they look like coots in the background as well, those little blackbirds. But classic flamingo pose, often standing on one leg. You can see the majority of these are roosting at the moment, and that's common. We find that in a lot of birds, particularly those birds with the long legs, the storks and the herons. Standing on one leg is not unusual. Amazing sense of balance they've got, but they've got quite big feet, which give them a good surface area underneath. Why they do that? Well, there's lots of suggestions. It could just be to rest each leg in turn. And alternatively, more likely, it's to do with thermoregulation. You can see that very clear and obvious pink skin, no feathers on those legs, strange backward facing, or we would say knees, but they're not actually, they're sort of ankle joints. They have very elongated feet, of course, and elongated toes, birds. But there is no feathers there, and therefore they can potentially gain or lose heat very quickly through the skin on their legs. So by standing on just one leg, it removes the problem of losing heat through both legs if you're standing in relatively cool water. Now, obviously, we're just seeing a small proportion of the flamingos here, but it is suggested there at Campus Dam that there can sometimes be over 50,000 lesser flamingos present at any given time. I've no idea if anybody wants to count them, if we can get a wide-angled view, but great to see that there's such a strong population here in South Africa. Canine Girl, you're saying happy Saturday. Great to be watching the show, and hi to me. Thank you very much, Canine Girl. Hi to you as well. Thank you very much for joining us. No, well, not 20,000 flamingos in that shot at least, but nice to see some regardless. But it's somewhere I'm going to have to get to at some point. I have to say, I wasn't very aware of Campus Dam. I'd heard of it, but I've never been to that area of the country, to be honest. So, as somebody who does thoroughly enjoy their birds, I'm sure there's a whole myriad of wading birds that can be found in that area with all those little reed beds. It'd be great to go and tick off some of those more difficult species like the warblers that you often get in there, which a lot of the time you have to do by sound because you don't get to see them very well. And these are indeed red-knobbed coots. You can see that very classic sort of white bill and shield on the forehead, and you might just be able to make out just on the top of the forehead there, that little red bump that gives them their name, and that characteristic little that they're making. Plenty of food for them down there. Generally speaking, they eat pretty much just plant material. They'll also be getting some algae out of the water there, diving down, looking for little plants and algae. And they may also eat some bits and pieces of other vegetation that, of course, fall into the water. Um, Occasionally, they will also take little sort of aquatic invertebrates, maybe some mollusks and other things like that. What a lovely patch of water for them. I'm surprised we're not seeing more birds, but I suppose coming into winter, we do lose some of our bird species. Oh, that looked like a little wasp, like a mud dauber that just flew in front of the camera. We do, of course, lose up to about 40% of our avian diversity in South Africa during the winter months with so many migratory birds. Not quite as many flamingos as I was expecting to see, but you never know. That's the beauty of the bush. Ooh, what have we got there? Something hiding in the reed bed there. A bit difficult to see. There was something skulking around just on the shoreline. I didn't see if it was maybe a heron or something. Striated heron. Just see some red legs, or a gallinae maybe, the bottom left there. Maybe a purple swamp hen. But those reed beds would be a great place to look for some of our smaller and harder to identify warblers, or sedge warblers, rush warblers, reed warblers. There are a whole selection of them, which we generally refer to in the nicest possible way of LBJs, little brown jobs, because they are very, very, very difficult to tell apart. And the key, as with much birding, is to know their calls, and that will often give them away. It's a great advice to anybody who's getting into birding, particularly if you don't live in an area where the bird diversity that you have incorporates lots of brightly coloured individuals that are easier to tell apart. If you can find yourself an app or some recordings of the common species and try and commit those to memory, it's a brilliant way to separate species, because you do get lots of weird sort of color morphs and different aberrations of individual species of birds, just like you do with people. We come in all different shapes and sizes, but generally speaking, we all speak the same language, and the same is true of birds. So actually, sort of what it physically looks like in terms of the coloration is one of the lesser important things in terms of identification, but sound, a really helpful one. And often you don't have to remember the exact song that the bird makes, because they'll make variations of those songs, but they often have the same sort of pitch and rhythm and tune. And once you start doing it a lot, you'll start picking up, well, I'm not sure what that is, but it sounds like a robin or it sounds like a thrush. And that'll give you a good place to start. Right, well, we're going to stay on the bird line, and we're going to head up to Victoria Falls and see what our vultures are up to. Okay, so our vulture restaurant at Victoria Falls Safari Lodge is pumping, as one would expect. Plenty of individuals there. So these vulture restaurants are quite important at the moment. As many of you may be aware, vultures are becoming more and more endangered. Um, and unfortunately, they don't have a particularly savoury reputation. So they're not at the forefront of a lot of people's thought processes when it comes to conservation, but it should never be underestimated just how important these animals are from a cleaning up the bush perspective and particularly for controlling disease. If it wasn't for vultures cleaning up all of the carcasses of the animals, there would be an awful lot more flies, an awful lot more diseases, and that would have a knock-on effect throughout the entire ecosystem. So hugely important and unfortunately grossly underestimated. A lot of the time the media doesn't portray them as particularly pleasant things, to their detriment, unfortunately. So some of the main problems which are affecting vultures include habitat loss, which is unfortunately the same for most things out there as urbanization spreads. Vultures, with that great size that many of them have and the wingspan and the weight of them, they do rely on relatively tall, sturdy trees in which to build their nests. And obviously, as they disappear, so do nesting areas and the ability to raise young in a safe environment without too much competition. But then, unfortunately, it's poisoning, and of course, the traditional medicine market within southern Africa does consider vultures relatively high prized. An awful lot of uses for different parts of the vultures. Again, it sort of depends on who you read and the different beliefs, the cultural beliefs of different tribes, but a lot of the uses of parts of vultures have to do with foresight, predictions, telling the future, mainly to do with the fact that there is a belief that a vulture can tell when an animal is going to shortly die, which is possibly true, just the way the animal is acting, and then that way that vultures can just seemingly arrive from absolutely nowhere and just descend onto a carcass. And it's amazing how those messages are passed on. We now know, of course, it's because they have exceptionally good eyesight. They circle on the thermals thousands of feet above our heads to the point where we can't even see them, but they're all keeping an eye on each other. And if they notice other individuals dropping down to a certain area, that will attract their attention. They will descend along with the masses, and these great sort of columns of vultures just seem to arrive out of the ether. Yolandi, you're asking how do reserves know that they're giving the vultures just enough food? Well, that's a good question. I think it's a very, very hard question to answer because how much food does a vulture need? I mean, if there's an elephant carcass there, they don't, it's not like a delicatessen line where they take a ticket and when they've got their appropriate amount of meats, they then move on and let the next ones come in. They will eat their full. Um, Humans are a little bit worse. We struggle to know when we've had enough, but vultures will eat until they're satiated, and when they do, they will stop eating. And don't forget, they've also got that wonderful function that many birds do of the crop within the throat, which will hold on to food and allow them to eat a huge amount of food very, very quickly, and then they can move somewhere where there's less competition, bring that food back up to the mouth and savor it without the stresses of worrying about what your neighbors are doing and whether you're going to lose your choice cut of meat. So good question, Delandi. I think, yeah, what is just enough food? I'm not really sure. They will obviously eat what is given to them, and I think as long as there's a regular supply. Remember, out in the wild, um, there's plenty of carcasses out there, but sometimes they'll find them, sometimes they're in accessible positions, sometimes they're not. So they will be pretty adaptable of going periods without food if required. And there are cases of vultures doing their own hunting if it is necessary as well. So see a marabou stork standing in the middle of the group there, sort of rather dominating the rest of the vultures. They look like a lot of hooded vultures, the smaller vultures there. I'm sure we've also got plenty of whitebacks, and if we're lucky, maybe some Cape vultures up there as well. Marabou storks, similarly to vultures, are very well known for their scavenging capabilities. They're often found, unfortunately, where humans leave rubbish as well. They've become fairly adaptable in that regard. But what they do lack is that incredibly strong beak designed for ripping and tearing open carcasses to get to the flesh and all the goodness inside. So they generally do wait on the peripheries, wait for the vultures to do all the hard work, and they'll come in and hoover up what's left or try and take a scrap of meat here and there, of course dominating some of the smaller species of the vultures. Now, I am a big bird lover, but I have to say that in terms of aesthetics, it's not a good-looking bird, if I'm honest. This sort of wispy hair all around the head, it does look rather ominous. I know vultures are often associated with death and undertakers, and we even call a group of vultures a wake of undertakers, a wake of vultures. But that marabou stork to me does very much look. There's just something rather unsettling about the way that it looks. Yeah, not a pretty bird. Clever, but not pretty. It's also interesting to see how those marabou storks are sort of adapting to this lifestyle. They seem to have taken a different evolutionary path by the way that they're going. They are very much sort of following the vultures, and that's one of the theories why they've lost all those feathers around their heads and necks. You'll notice the same with vultures, and that's just an adaptation that when you're sticking your head inside of carcasses that is filled with sort of visceral unpleasantness, you don't want to get gunk all over your head and neck where you are unable to clean yourself. And it is thought perhaps that over time, these marabou storks have lost a lot of the feathers around their head and neck for the same reasons. So almost sort of potentially going down the vulture line from an evolutionary perspective on the short term, of course. Kristen, thank you for the question. You're asking how different vulture species sound to each other. Um, Again, good question, and one you'd probably actually have to ask the vulture directly. But they do all sound, or the major species certainly do all sound different. They are calls that we as guides are expected to know. Many of them are found sort of on the core and the different bird lists that we have to learn and get tested on and identify their calls. But how they sound to us, don't forget, and how they sound to another bird may be very, very different. Our ears to us are fine, obviously, unless you have a problem or unless you're getting a little bit older and they're becoming less efficient. But to birds, hearing is incredibly important. Sight and sound are their most prominent senses. So we know about the bright colours of birds from, a bit of a scuffle going on there. Bright colours of birds and things from a mating perspective and dimorphism within species in many occasions. But it's very, very important to hear one another and recognize individual species. Now, if you actually record a bird sound and then listen to it at a far more elevated level in terms of technology or what we believe another bird would hear, to something that just sounds like one or two notes to us might actually be 6 or 7 notes. But they are so close together, the way in which those notes are produced, that our relatively primitive ears are unable to separate the sounds. but to another bird, they may be hearing something completely different or in a lot more detail than we can. So even though individual species do sound different to us, to an individual of that species, it will sound very, very different to another one. Canan girl, you're back. Thank you again for another question. Is there a hierarchy system with vultures for food resources and mating? Certainly for food resources, yes. In the vulture world, size does matter. And of the main species that we get here, the king of the castle will be the lappet-faced vulture, the largest of all the vultures that we have here and the heaviest beak. They will generally dominate a carcass, and a lot of the other vultures will have to wait for a lappet face to arrive, particularly if it has been a natural death and it isn't just what's left over from predators feeding, where the skin and the body has already been opened. Lappet faced vultures have a very, very strong beak, it's kind of like a tin opener, and they are able to open up the carcasses of dead animals. Whereas the other ones, depending on the animal, of course, are not able to do so. So they're kind of reliant upon the lappet-faced vulture or a hyena or other scavengers just to get through that thick skin, and then the rest will pile in. Next, sort of size-wise, you're looking at the Cape vulture, but they are critically endangered now, only a few thousand left in the world, and pretty restricted to areas where there are cliffs, because that is where they do most of their breeding. But they would be the next in line. And then the whitebacks would come because they are just so numerous. The whitebacks make up the majority in terms of species numbers. So by sheer weight of numbers, they can dominate a site, but you'll often find the other ones in and around the area. And then right at the bottom end of the pecking order is the poor little hooded vultures. We can see a few in the foreground there, the smaller ones. They have very, very small beaks in comparison. And a little bit lacking in bulk. So they do tend to wait on the peripheries, and then they'll move in towards the end when the feeding frenzy has died down a little bit. And nature is very clever, and because they've all got slightly different sized and different shaped bills, they're specialized in feeding on different things. So there are some areas between bones and close to joints that those larger bills are unable to gain access to. And those little more sort of tweezer-like bills of the hooded vultures can get sort of in between the ribs and reach some of the parts that the other vultures cannot reach. In terms of mating, I'm not really sure. Obviously, there's no crossbreeding between vulture species that I'm aware of, although anything is possible. And generally speaking, it will be done on size and voice and confidence and whatever female vultures find attractive in a male vulture, I suppose. But all good questions. Thank you, everybody. Do keep them coming in. Okay, but nice to check in on our vulture restaurant. I think next stop on our Damcan tour is going to be Tau. Let's go and see what's happening up at Tau's waterhole. We've got some warthogs. So we've come all the way from Victoria Falls to the northwest of South Africa, into Madikwe Game Reserve, to a waterhole that I know quite well, having been to Tau on a couple of occasions and done some work for Wild Earth when we were broadcasting from Madikwe. Normally lots and lots happening at Tau Waterhole, and here we've got a couple of young warthogs engaging in some social interaction of some description. Looks like a mother with probably last year's offspring. Shame to only see her with one. Warthogs can, or often do, produce sort of up to about 5 piglets, but unfortunately their survival rate is not good. And looking at that on the assumption that is mum, although she doesn't look particularly large, but that's definitely a smaller one that's disappeared off to the left. That may well be the only one who's got who's made it this far, unfortunately. Fall prey to a lot of things like lion, leopard, and hyena. I'm sure they will have enjoyed a bit of a roll in the mud. Certainly looks like the young boy has. And I know it's a boy, well, for one reason that you may just be able to see under the table. Yes, she's also been in the mud. And also looking at the face as well. You can see she's only got those warts under her eyes, whereas the boy's got 2 sets of warts, another set closer to the end of the snout. Having a good scratch. I suppose if mum's using the rock you want to use, then just use mum. Very coarse fur that they have. Okay, come on, come from. And here are the rest. So it looks like she was more successful than I thought. Well, that's good to see. A lovely little sounder of warthogs. And that seems to be a very popular scratching rock. Probably enjoying a bit of a mud wallow, looking at that shiny, muddy skin that they've got. There'll be a good old scratch. Just imagine how satisfying that would be. We don't give credit to our hands and fingers, and particularly our opposable thumbs. I'm sitting here now probably because I'm watching warthog scratching, and I'm scratching my arm. So easy for me. But if I didn't have those, imagine having to go and... Ooh! The wildebeests on a bit of a rampage. I wonder what gave them a spook. It's 2 boys chasing each other. Yeah, imagine how satisfying it must be to be able to scratch yourself if you haven't got the means to normally scratch. Well, I don't know what happened there, but it scared off our warthogs, which is a bit of a shame. Regrettably, well, not regrettably, good thing for the wildebeest. There's no lions in hot pursuit. I only saw 2, so I imagine it was possibly 2 males chasing one another. But an ostrich. A beautiful male ostrich. You can tell that just from the colour of the feathers. Male's black in colour with a very pink beak and pink on the front of the legs, which during breeding season will become much, much more prevalent. Basically puts on his extra special clothes to show off to the ladies, and I find the beak will go very, very pink and the front of those legs will go very, very pink, just as an advertisement for females that he is looking. And females, if we see one in comparison, have a much more brownish colour to their feathers. Size of those legs, incredibly strong and potentially dangerous. Never underestimate an ostrich, people. Those 2 toes on the end of an ostrich's leg are armed with fearsome claws, well over an inch long, and they can be very, very sharp. And if they feel it necessary, they can kick out, and they can do an awful lot of damage with those claws. High-stepping ostrich, this one. You can see that red hue on the front of those sort of shins now. partners ostriches. Incredible creatures, really. Something we don't see very often in the southern Kruger area, particularly in the Sabi Sands and the Timbabati, so which is where I have spent most of my time there. I think in all my time there, I can count the number of ostriches on a couple of hands. I know they have been seen on Juma. I actually did see tracks for an ostrich once going along the northern boundary of Juma, and I believe one was seen up at Bottlesoak Dam last year, even if it was briefly. Problem is for ostriches, they are somewhat savoured by lions, and they're not very good at getting away from lions. They can run quickly, but they're easily taken unawares, and if they're not out in the open, they're a relatively easy meal for a lion. When I was working in the sands on a full-time basis, I remember I did find an ostrich once on safari, and I called it in on the radio, and nobody believed me because I think it was the first one that had been seen there for about 7 years, and it became very exciting. Everybody came to look at it. We saw it multiple days, and then one day I found his tracks again, and I was following the tracks, and then we found a pile of feathers and not much else, unfortunately. So that ostrich didn't last long, and is often the way for ostriches in areas with a high predator density. Oscar, good afternoon, or morning or evening, depending on where you are contacting us from. Are ostrich farms illegal? Um, no, they're not. They are legal as far as I know. I stand to be corrected as always. It's not something I know a huge amount about. I've never been to an ostrich farm. But they are farms. They're farmed for meat, amongst other things. In fact, even in places like here, I'm currently in the UK, we can buy ostrich steaks if we need to in certain butcheries and supermarkets and things. So not illegal as far as I'm aware. I'm not a great fan of this. I don't even want to call it sport, hobby, pastime, whatever you want to call it, of people riding ostriches. I don't think that is a particularly good way to utilize an ostrich, but that's a conversation for another time. But particularly in South Africa, there are quite a few ostrich farms. And again, I think it comes down to anything, be it chickens or farming, anything else, as long as the animals are looked after and are kept in good conditions, then I suppose, well, it's just the way of the world these days. We've got some red-billed teals enjoying sunlight on the island there, and what looks like, I think, a moorhen, common moorhen. See those teals having a good search around, filtering something out of the water there on the right. And ducks, just like the flamingos we saw earlier, filter feeders. They're passing water into that beak, and they've got these little sort of bony plates where they force the water out and leave behind all the things they're looking for. All those piles of elephant dung on the shoreline there. You see how popular a spot this is for elephants. I'm surprised we haven't seen any. Certainly when I've been up to Tau, this waterhole has often got a regular influx of elephants and a whole variety of other animals as well. Our weaver nests. We're getting ready for Christmas. Little baubles in the tree. Difficult to know just from looking at here exactly which type, but I would imagine probably village weavers. Those are the ones you normally find close to water. Otherwise, there's a huge population of southern-mast weavers as well. Those two are quite difficult to tell apart as well. You need to have a good look at their backs. The village weaver used to be known as spotted-backed weaver, which made a lot more sense because it does have a sort of a mottled yellow and black back, where the southern mask is more of a sort of plain olive green. Slight difference in the face as well, and the amount of yellow and black on the foreheads. But generally speaking, having a look at their back is the simplest way to tell them apart. A very head-on view of spur-winged goose. Not quite the grace of a flamingo standing on one leg, but hey. The very long-legged black-winged stilt in the foreground there. And a very streamlined silhouette or shape of a grey heron. Standing motionless. Look at the sharpness of that beak. They're often used as sort of a stabbing motion to grab fish, so not always just with the two mandibles of their beak. They'll often literally just stab a fish. You can see how sharp the tip of that bill is. The long neck almost has sort of a hinge joint in the middle, which allows it to thrust it forwards with great speed and accuracy. You certainly wouldn't want to be getting in the way of that. Probably seen herons catching frogs and toads more so than fish, but I think that's a bit of a slippery customer for a heron, a frog. So you often see them sort of playing with them out on the shore and dropping them and picking them up again, and often trying to sort of wash them off in the water because they do secrete those sort of toxins from their skin, a lot of these amphibians. So the herons will quite dutifully sort of wash them off, splash them around in the water, try and get rid of some of those slimy toxins before they do swallow them. Okay, we're going to pop over to Rosie's pan now and see what's happening in that neck of the woods. Oh, spectacular. We watched giraffes for about half an hour yesterday, hoping that one would come down for a drink, and they never did. Let's see if this girl is going to have a drink. A beautiful sight, very African. Let's see if we get that classic S shape of water when she whips her head up again, sprays a little sort of stream of water out through her mouth. A great shot to go for if you're into wildlife photography. Wait till the giraffe's finished, and then that neck will snap up, and they'll often sort of spray water out of their mouth. The pressure on those joints on the front legs. There we go. The little flip. I'll do a quick check that nothing snuck up on her while she had her head down. But that head does sort of whip back up. Yes, she wants to see and make sure that she hasn't missed anything while she hasn't been paying attention. But in order to stretch that long neck down to the water, there's a big ligament that runs down the back of her neck. It's called a nuchal ligament. And when she bends down to go to the water, that's put under a huge amount of tension, like a spring. And then when she wants to raise her head back, because you imagine in order to lift that big neck up and down would take an awful lot of muscle power, so it's easier to do it with ligaments. Where she's standing now is in the relaxed position, and that ligament is holding her neck and her head up, so she doesn't have to spend time thinking about doing it. And then when she bends down to the water, that ligament is stretched, and then when it comes back up, it sort of pings back into position. Of course, the upshot of that, of course, is blood flow. And when you put your head down, if any of you have been sitting down or lying down for too long and get up too quickly, often get lightheaded when the blood runs in and out of the brain. And that's a big problem for a giraffe, that they have a specialized organ at the base of the brain, colloquially known as a blood sponge, which just helps to regulate the blood flow in and out of the brain. So when she does whip her head up like that too quickly, she doesn't pass out. She's quite thirsty today. I wonder if that's enough. The giraffes could go days without drinking. They're very water independent animals thanks to their incredibly efficient digestive system. They do get an awful lot of moisture through the vegetation that they're eating. They will need to eat more, drink more during the winter months, of course, because there is less moisture in the foliage that they are feeding from, but they can go days without having to actually find water to drink. And that's a wonderful adaptation when you are so vulnerable when you drink. But the best way to avoid that is to not have to drink very often. Then we're going to have another drink. She's definitely getting her fill. This is as long as I remember ever seeing a giraffe to drink. They definitely don't drink for this long, but you can see she's having a good drink. Head up, double check the surroundings. But she's drinking more often than I'm used to, but you can see how dry it is there. So taking the opportunity while she can. Okay, well, what a beautiful spectacle that was. Always incredible to watch a giraffe having a drink. You almost feel sorry for them as to how much they have to go through and what they have to put their body through just in order to quench their thirst. I would say that sort of ungainly grace that they have to go through. But yeah, she definitely had a good drink. Disappearing off into the savannah. I've just actually thought about having a little nibble on that tree. Looks possibly like a red thorn, one of the, well, I said acacias now. Of course, we're not supposed to call them acacias anymore. Red thorn would be one of the Fachelia species now, or genuses. I say now, it's been that way for years, but it's going to take me probably the rest of my life to stop calling them all acacias. Beautiful autumn colours now. See a lot of those trees, probably bush willows, beginning to change colours now. Tree pretty much just cutting off a lot of the supply of nutrients to those leaves. Certain chemicals in there, certain pigmentations, one called anthocyanin, beginning to build up, giving it that orangey yellow colour. No more photosynthesis happening, and chlorophyll's been removed, and those leaves will drop off and just save the tree energy during those harsher winter months when photosynthesis is less easy, and a lot of those nutrients that the tree is now saving will be stored within the roots. Excuse me. Well, that was very special. I think we learned that after yesterday. Those of you who joined me yesterday, we spent a good half an hour hoping those giraffe would come down for a drink, and finally, with a little bit of patience, which of course is key with wildlife, we got our reward. I've got a question for Jamie. Thank you very much, Jamie. Some herbivores have naturally fat stomachs. How can you tell when they are pregnant? Jamie, well, a lot of that has to do with their digestive systems. So ruminants generally are relatively slim when you look at them. It's the hind gut fermenters, which is a different type of digestion, that are the ones a little bit harder to discern the differences. So just for anybody who's not too familiar with those, a ruminant has the 4 chambers in the stomach. There's a lot of bacterial fermentation going on within that stomach, but it's very, very efficient, and those animals don't have to eat a huge amount of food because of that efficient system. So they're relatively slim. The hindgut fermenters really just have a single stomach with an enlarged cecum, which is a sort of an area just past the stomach as the food passes through. And in there is an awful lot of bacterial work that is done, and one of the byproducts of bacterial fermentation, as the name suggests, is gas, and that causes those animals to look somewhat bloated at times. The classic example is the zebra, of course, and they have so much gas, actually, if you give a zebra a fright or you see one running, it'll often be accompanied by the release of said gases, which causes much amusement on drive, as you can imagine. But you can still tell when one is pregnant. The females look incredibly large. Their stomachs sort of become a little bit more bulbous, and they hang a little bit lower to the ground. So it's hard to explain without actually seeing one, but it would just look bigger than normal. I feel terrible saying it. But that is the case. You could just see there's more of a rotundness to a pregnant female in a hindgut fermenter. You can see it in elephants. You can see it in rhino, although I wouldn't say it's quite as obvious in rhino. But a pregnant zebra is unmistakable if you compare it to a non-pregnant one. So yeah, it's very difficult to explain without showing you a picture, but they just look a little bit more bloated than they would otherwise do so. Little. No, Bill, sorry. Bill, you are asking who are the lovelies in FC today? I should probably have introduced them. My apologies to my colleagues. I've got Tadiwa, who is directing for me in my ear today. She's doing a fantastic job telling me where we're going and what to expect when we get there. But I'm glad you're enjoying live at the Waterhole today, Bill. Thank you very much for joining us. Yes, we must thank the hardworking people in Johannesburg, without whom none of this would be possible. They make my life very easy, pretty much. And of course, I'm not sure who are our zoomies today, people controlling the camera, so I'm trying to sort of follow their lead as they move around, and we're discussing whatever we find. So thank you all who are involved. See a lot of these trees losing their leaves. That does look like a leadwood though, which often does look a little bit sparse. Leadwood, one of the hardest trees that we find out in the bush, as the name suggests. And hopefully when I get back into the parks in South Africa, which will be in the next month or two, we will be in the grips of winter and very much the dry season, which you can see from the coloration there is coming. But it's my favourite time of year, despite the lack of bird species, which is a bit of a shame. Visibility is excellent, and to be quite honest, it's just not so hot. And having grown up in the UK, despite having been in South Africa now for the best part of 17 years, I don't think I'll ever get used to that sort of sapping heat, and especially the humidity. Lots of little things living in there. A lovely way the water is glistening in the sunlight. And you can see that sort of scummy deposit on top of the water there. No doubt caused when a lot of the animals come down and actually bathe in the water, and we get a lot of secretions from their skin, and of course a lot of animals will defecate and urinate in the water, and that produces that sort of surface. And then often you'll see when the elephants come down and they'll flick around with their trunks on the top of the water, they're just clearing away some of that scummy layer so that they can get to the fresher water underneath. These actually look like sedges, looking from the shape of those inflorescence, if that's the right word for the flowering plants of sedges. Very beautiful colours, so many different shades of greens to yellows to oranges and reds. It is a beautiful time of the year, autumn. I'd say where I am currently at the moment, which is in the UK visiting some family, for once it's actually a sunny day outside. Somewhat taken aback by this strange glowing yellow orb in the sky. Don't see that very often over here, and haven't seen it for a long time. And I don't think I've had a clear night yet, which has been a little frustrating. Isaac 92, could Barbary lions from captive populations ever be reintroduced to Africa, perhaps in a private game reserve? Um, I have absolutely no idea, if I'm completely honest. I know reintroduction of some species like tigers has been tried in South Africa. I honestly don't know too much about Barbary lions in terms of their required habitats and their behaviour, so it's hard to say, but what I would say is nature is pretty adaptable, and given time and the right management, I think it is possible. But the problem you have to worry about is obviously would they be able to, particularly if they've been captive, what you generally find is that they've lost the ability to hunt for themselves. They've lost the skill set, the patience, the knowledge, and the being bushwise about how to do it. And you find that's one of the biggest problems. And then my another initial thought on that would be when you're introducing a species that isn't normally from an area, you run the risk that that species will get hammered pretty quickly by any sorts of diseases or pathogens which its body have just not been exposed to. We were talking yesterday about tick-borne diseases and the effect that ticks have upon species and animal health. So I would think that would be a big problem as well. They would be exposed to an awful lot of new toxins and potential diseases that their body would have absolutely zero immunity to. And I would think there'd be a very good chance that they would fall foul to something relatively quickly, unfortunately. It's also generally not a very good idea to introduce an alien species into a population. We've seen it time and time again. It has a knock-on effect on everything else and throws the balance of nature out of kilt. And having just spent a few months in New Zealand, I mean, that is one of the best examples in the world. There's a huge push in New Zealand to eradicate a lot of alien species because the majority of species that you see there have been introduced, and they've had a terrifying knock-on effect to the indigenous population there, to the point that many of the things are endangered because they're just being out-competed or out-dominated by these new species. Take rabbits, any of the predators. There's a big problem of possums, which have come across from Australia and New Zealand. There are rabbits everywhere, even from a flora perspective. What we call the wilding pines, which are just sort of introduced pine species from Europe and from North America, have just taken an incredible grip, particularly the area I was in. Massive stands of pine trees there, and they become like impenetrable thickets, but like sort of the sicklebush thickets that you find down in South Africa, but from a species that shouldn't be there in the first place. Something like black wattle would be a good example of a similar problem in South Africa. But once you get one species dominating an area, it destroys the diversity and the habitat for other things, and makes it a lot harder for other things to get a grip. So very, very strict regulations coming in and out of Australia and New Zealand to ensure that you're not bringing anything in with you from outside, because they have learnt their lesson, and say massive pushes to make New Zealand free from predators. If you're ever lucky enough to go to sort of Stewart Island way down in the south, and Ulva Island, which is a little island just south of Stewart Island, that is predator free, but there are huge conservation initiatives from the Department of Conservation trying to ensure it remains that way, doing lots and lots of research, hoping to keep things like say rats and possums and other things that do take out the indigenous bird life. So a nice idea, Isaac, but I don't think it's going to work. Right, I think we're going to head back over to Victoria Falls and see what's happening up there. Well, there we have it. We were talking about him earlier, and as much of a bird lover as I might be, that is a marabou stork, and let's say it's unique looking. Let's leave it at that. We can see that sort of balding pink fur, and this very much looks like a male from that sort of enhanced wattle that you can see flopping around there on the right hand side. That's one of the ways that they communicate, of course, filling that with air and forcing it out through the beak. It's an impressive bird, but yeah, not a looker. There's one of our hooded vultures in the background. But massive wingspan. It's a monstrous thing if you actually ever do get to see one up close. Wingspan I think is a good 2 to 3 meters on a full-grown adult. A few of them enjoying the water there. You'll notice as well one of the other really famous things about marabou storks is their habit of defecating on their legs. You can see those sort of legs look quite white. That's the uric acid, and they have a tendency to purposefully defecate or urinate on their legs, and that white coating creates a brilliant way of reflecting the hot African sunshine. So nice to see the vultures having a drink. You often see vultures in the water as well. I say they have this reputation about being dirty animals or dirty birds, thanks to films and documentaries and things, but they're actually very, very clean animals. And you'll often see vultures bathing. I've seen hundreds of vultures in a waterhole before, having a good wash off after they've been finishing off a carcass. So they're not just scavengers, these marabou storks. That's how I've also seen them taking things like frogs out of the water. And they also take small mammals as well if they can, rats and mice, potentially even other birds. One of the other things that they will do if they can get their hands on them is take out crocodile eggs. So again, one of the other many things that affects crocodile eggs. You would think crocodiles would be fairly well protected, but between things like the storks and particularly the monitor lizards and other scavenging animals, those nests that the crocodiles dig up on the banks of rivers and dams and waterholes are in constant danger of being dug up. And then say any marabou stork that can get his hand on a crocodile egg will be very, very happy. Speaking of, I think that is possibly a crocodile, a bit hard to tell from here. I think I'm seeing those sort of ridge lines down its back. Hard to say for sure. It's an area of the world I've never been up to yet, Victoria Falls and the surrounding area. It's very much on the bucket list. I've been lucky enough to do a lot of the southern African countries, but I haven't done the Zeds. Zambia and Zimbabwe I'm yet to get up to. Botswana, Namibia, Mozambique, not a problem. Done those a few times. But I think next on my bucket list is Zambia. I get to one of the Luangwa reserves. For some reason, I've always wanted to go there. See the stalk in the foreground. Looks like he might be picking open some of that old elephant dung there. They're quite happy to eat little insects. Those piles of elephant dung provide perfect habitats, little micro habitats for insects and arthropods who are still feeding on all that goodness that comes out of the elephant. One of those hind gut fermenters, so inefficient digestive system, very undigested material that comes out, and there's lots and lots of microorganisms that are expelled at the same time, which are perfect for a lot of animals to enjoy that, and also a lot of the stuff that hasn't been used by the elephant's body. Rather defensive over that little island there. This looks like a youngster, this one. Excuse me, everybody. I see we've had a few more questions and comments come through. S.A. Birder saying, nice to have you back. Thank you very much. And you're off bird watching on Monday and guess going to try and learn some of the warbler calls and songs. Well, good luck and enjoy. I always found them very difficult. They're quite a sort of a harsh, grating noise that a lot of them give off. Some of them are quite distinctive. The sedge, well, I'm trying to remember now. I'm a little bit rusty on my bird calls, but there's the little rush warbler. That's quite a distinctive one. And one of the sedge warblers. I remember I did get a great reed warbler up at Tower Waterhole, where we were visiting a little bit earlier. So good luck. I wish you well with your warblers. Okay, so you've got another couple come through. Proudly SA, you're asking, do vultures get most of the moisture from the carcasses they feed on? Yes, they do. To be honest, they absorb an awful lot of the body fluids, not just the blood, but all the other juicy bits in there. So they get a large proportion of what is required from their feeding habits. So yes, they do, but they will also take the opportunity to drink. Um, if it is available. So, nature is pretty adaptable, and there's no point giving something up if it's there and safe and easy to access. So why not? But yeah, not the diet that I personally would prefer. But yes, is the answer. They get a lot of their moisture from their diet, as do most animals. You see, Canine Girl, you're also asking how do, I'm not sure if you're referring to vultures or storks or marabous in this case, but I imagine the same. How do they stop their heads and neck areas from sunburn as they have no protection? Um, that is actually an excellent question. Um, and I will have to do a little bit of research to see if I can get back to you on that. I'm unaware that they produce any particular sort of natural sunblock secretions, although it would make sense that they would do to counteract that problem. They are rather red, so whether that is a result of sunburn, I'm not sure. Maybe that red colour helps to deal with the heat and the UV rays in a different way, or perhaps their skin is specially evolved to be better adept at dealing with the UV problem from the sun. Um, but that is a very good question. I don't know, is the simple answer, because they do seem to spend a lot of time just standing out in the sun. So, I mean, I guess those wispy hairs there will offer some form of protection. I mean, I take myself, for example. I mean, like many men, I have hairs on my forearms, and my forearms don't really get very burnt compared to my upper arms where there is less hair. So maybe just even having that sparse covering of hair that you can see sort of silhouetted there or backlit there, I should say, offers some form of protection. But there must be something in the skin, some form of pigmentation, um, melanin, one would assume, that is just better adept at dealing with the UV rays and the harsh African sunlight. So, Canine Goat, that's giving me something to look at. I'm not 100% sure, but an excellent question. So it's lovely to get questions from you guys watching and listening. They make us think of things that we may not have considered yet. I'm actually just doing a sneaky quick look whilst I'm talking to you all here. I can't find anything specific to marabous. The vultures have got enough feather covering on their heads that don't think they need to worry. But yes, that's a rather balding approach that the marabous have gone. You would expect they might have an issue. To be honest, they look a little bit like me after I've been on the beach for about half an hour. I'm afraid I inherited my father's skin, which seemed to come with a complete absence of melanin and any ability to deal with heat whatsoever. I think over the time, parts of me that have been more exposed, so my forearms and my face can handle the African sun. But I shall never forget, many years ago, I went to Mozambique on a holiday, and it was torrential rain for I think the first 2.5 days. And on when the rain finally did let up, I went down to the beach. I took my binoculars. I was strolling up the shore there with my binoculars, looking for some birds, with my top off and just a pair of shorts on. And I'd rather foolishly forgot to put any sun cream on. And I can honestly say I wasn't out for longer than half an hour or 40 minutes, but my back so badly burned that was be done for the rest of the holiday. I had to wear a t-shirt at all times, a stamina t-shirt. I had to have cold showers for my side or my stomach because I couldn't lie on my back. Um, some of us are blessed with the ability to use the sun, and others of us struggle badly, I'm afraid. Some do seem to be redder than others. I would imagine that's more of a dominance thing. This one on the right, or now in the middle, seems to be slightly redder than the others. Now, whether that is an age thing, or as I said, more of a dominance thing, I'm not sure. Or maybe he's like me and struggles a bit more than the others. Is the hippo that does develop that reddish colour. Now, that is the result of a special secretion that is created by glands in the skin. Um, I'm trying to remember what it's called now, hipposudoric acid or something they call it. And that reacts when it's on the skin and turns that sort of pinkish colour. And that helps with an antiseptic properties and also sunblock properties. A lot of hippos are not sunburnt, like a lot of people think. That is that secretion helping them to deal with the sun. But that's unique to the hippo, as the name of it suggests. This one seems to be taking life very easily there. I love to see them sitting in those dead trees because they're quite a big, heavy bird. They do need quite a lot of space, particularly when they fly. They need to have the ability to stretch those massive wings. Certainly, my overriding memory of marabou storks is seeing those dead trees filled with marabou storks, sometimes 10, 20 of them. A little yellow-billed stork making a cameo, and something else. I didn't actually catch what the other one was there. Hopefully, we can see it again. But interesting to see the different feeding strategy of the yellow-billed stork, just sort of swaying the head side to side with that bill kept open, hoping that it just makes contact with something on the receptors on that lower mandible, and the second it feels anything, it will snap shut, grabbing whatever it is that unfortunately swam through its grasp. Maybe the longest I've watched a marabou stork for a long time, actually, and despite all the unpleasant things I said about it, I'm beginning to feel quite attached to the marabou storks. I think I'm going to spend a bit more time appreciating them. Look like a great egret that just landed in the background. Diane in the UK, you're asking whether vultures ever eat so much that they can't take off. Um, Quite possibly. I mean, I have seen vultures eat an enormous amount of food, and sometimes you see them really struggling to take off. They need an incredibly big runway, and they run along and they're flapping frantically and only flying a couple of inches above the ground for a little while before they can finally get airborne. So I imagine that there are times when they choose to not. I don't think I've ever seen, or we would ever see one trying and sort of giving up and then tumbling into a dusty heap, as amusing as that sounds. I've never seen it. It reminds me of one of those "if animals eat McDonald's" things you used to find on YouTube's and other similar places. But yeah, I've seen some very, very large ones that have struggled, but I think most just about manage it. And I think once they've got themselves up into a high point, into a tree, what most vultures do when it's time to fly, to avoid having to flap the wings to get you off the ground, which takes a lot more energy, is they tend to sort of drop out of a tree and just spread their wings and then use the aerodynamic shape of their wings to help them gain lift. And of course, vultures and storks and many other large birds well known to use those thermals so that they don't have to extend so much flapping power, and they can use those columns of rising air to help them gain height, and then they glide incredibly efficiently between those thermals, potentially not having to flap their wings for hours and hours on end of being airborne, which is a remarkable feat. Like albatrosses, I was lucky enough to see 5 different species of albatross whilst I was over in New Zealand. There were a few albatrosses and a few what they call mollymawks, which are like the lesser albatrosses. And also they can go days without requiring to flap their wings, just riding the currents of air that are coming off the waves on the oceans. And our crocodile is out in full view. Magnificent animal. I was talking yesterday about those prehistoric relics of the incredible history, hundreds of thousands of years of evolution and unchanged. I know I've mentioned it before, but it blows my mind that there are things that pretty much predate dinosaurs that still live amongst us. One thing we find very difficult to put on the camera sometimes because they often don't sit still as dragonflies as well. You put them in the same vein. Some of the oldest examples of flying organisms that we've got, dragonflies, of course, there would have been things coming before dragonflies. They didn't just miraculously appear. They had to evolve from something. But from a fossil record perspective, some of those early dragonflies with wingspans of a meter or more across. You can imagine what that must have looked like. But don't forget, of course, back then the world had an awful lot more oxygen, which allowed animals to exert a lot more energy and be able to deal with that problem. And there were a lot less predators, which enabled these things to get to such big sizes. But the most remarkable thing about a crocodile, for me, has always been its heart. Thought by many to be the most advanced heart within the animal kingdom of any animal or any organism, and unique in what it is able to do. So all reptiles have a 3-chambered heart as a rule, except for the crocodile, which has a 4-chambered heart, and an incredibly specialized one at that. And not only is it completely different to other reptiles, but it has the ability, thanks to the use of special valves within its heart, to channel oxygenated blood to areas where it is needed and to not channel it to areas where it is not needed, and that enables them to stay underwater for much, much longer because it avoids the carbon dioxide buildup that is utilized in uh, organs within the body that is not required. So, for example, it doesn't send any oxygenated blood to the lungs because that would be pointless. The lungs are not functioning. That uses an awful lot of oxygenated blood to keep them working. Even when the animal's underwater, that builds up carbon dioxide in the body, and that's actually what needs us to come up for air, is a buildup of carbon dioxide, not a lack of oxygen. And so some of these crocodiles, particularly when they become inactive, they lie on the bottom of the dam or the river that they're in. They can slow their heartbeat down incredibly and can stay underwater for well over an hour if needs be. The other amazing thing about it is they have another tube that connects the heart pretty much directly to the stomach, and a lot of that excess carbon dioxide which is built up within the body, instead of being wasted, is actually utilized. It is funneled into the stomach to help with the creation of gastric juices, which are very rich in carbon dioxide. And that's one of the reasons that or one of the things that helps a crocodile have such an effective digestive system, in that it can pretty much get rid of anything. Bone, fur, hair, all of those things can be broken up in the digestive stomach of a crocodile, which many other things can't. Very few things can digest hair, for example. It's very difficult to do. Horn moths is a good example, and that's why you find a lot of hair in predator scat, or it's regurgitated because it just can't be dealt with. But I would expect nothing else from an animal that's been around for 200 plus million years. Nature has done some pretty incredible work during that time and has shaped the crocodile into one of the most efficient killing machines on the planet. As I said yesterday, wouldn't have said scared of crocodiles, but hugely respectful of crocodiles, and you certainly wouldn't catch me swimming anywhere where I thought there might be the chance of a crocodile. You do hear of people getting taken by crocodiles. Well, a lot of people are taken by crocodiles, unfortunately, but those who survive, there are various ways of trying. Oh, little guinea fowl. You can go for the eyes. Seems like a strange choice, but if you can get your arm far enough down the crocodile's throat, it won't be able to submerge with you because it would also drown. So that's an extreme measure. Otherwise, I do know somebody personally who had an encounter with a crocodile who was pulled into the water. It grabbed hold of his wrist, pulled him into the water, probably about a 2.5, 3 meter crocodile, so a big croc. And so the biggest danger is drowning in that situation. And from what I recall, so he basically just clung on, almost sort of bear hugged the crocodile. And eventually this sort of confused the croc, and he let him go, and he managed to get away with some nasty injuries to his sort of hand and surrounding area. So a close call, but be very, very careful with the crocodile. I think that goes without saying. It's common sense more than anything, but good advice nonetheless. It looks like there's a little family of guinea fowl moving into the area, but we're going to head back up to Badikwe into Tau Lodge. It sounds like we've got a little bit of activity at the waterhole. Let's go have a Oh, we've got our zebras. Let's see if we can see a pregnant zebra from here. Difficult to tell. I mean, that one walking away from us, for example, if it was pregnant, I think even though you can see that there's a bit of a belly there, it would be very much obvious. And obviously, it becomes more obvious the more heavily pregnant that animal is. Um, Most herbivores give birth around about sort of October, November time, October, November, December, because that's during the rainy season. So most of these zebras, if they are pregnant, will still have another 3 or 4 months of development to go yet. And obviously, the closer you get to the end of term, the more obvious the pregnancy would be. Classic combination of zebra and wildebeest that we see time and time again out in the bush, both of them being grazers and enjoying the fact that this is sort of nicely out in the open and they can see any potential danger coming and they both have access to water. Some scuffling going on in the back. Cheetahs and other animals, barcodes with legs. Yes, that's exactly what they are. The zebras, barcodes with legs. It still blows my mind that nature has come up with this design. It's just the most abstract, crazy thing that you could think of, but yet evidently it works. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. Natural selection would have got rid of it a long time ago. So we know that there's various reasons for stripes. I'm sure they've been discussed at length. But everything from controlling the fly populations, it's been shown regularly that by having black and white stripes next to one another, it confuses a fly in terms of its depth perception, and they tend to just sort of fly into the animal as opposed to being able to alight on it. So they actively avoid these sort of stripy patterns. It just doesn't do well with their visual senses. There's also the talk of the thermoregulation, the black absorbing heat and white reflecting heat, creating convection currents, little eddies of air that circulate across the animal's skin, and the capillaries close to the surface get cooled, and then that cooled blood gets sent underneath that fairly hefty subcutaneous fatty layer of a zebra to keep them cool. There's of course the camouflage element, which may not be too apparent when looking at them, but if you ever take a photograph of a zebra out in the bush and then make it black and white, it does become a little bit more obvious how that might work, and also the dazzling effect of confusing a potential predator by all these lines, making it very, very difficult for the predator to work out an interception point. The speed and the trajectory of that animal becomes difficult to figure out. They're an amazing coat, certainly. Nimrod, you're asking, do we have crocs here too? Have you seen one travelling to another waterhole? If you're referring to Madikwe and Tau, absolutely, there are some big crocs in Tau's waterhole. They are pretty widely spread crocodiles, so you find them in most places in southern Africa. And as you rightly said, yes, they do migrate from one water source to another in response either to population pressure, or if a waterhole is drying up and they can spend the night outside of water, they can just sort of find a shady spot. And it's not impossible to accidentally bump into a crocodile that you didn't know was there whilst walking through the bush during the winter when there's not much water around. They do become almost, well, they sort of estivate, as we would call it, so they just kind of close down. It's like hibernation, but in response to heat and drying areas. And there are very silly people who will go right up to wild crocodiles lying under a tree and take photos with it. I wouldn't recommend that at all. I have personally never seen one migrating from point A to point B, but have regularly seen tracks of crocodiles moving between waterholes. They leave a very obvious mark from their tails, and they've got very distinctive feet. What I particularly love about the crocodile tracks is you often are able to see the scales of the animal's body, particularly if it's stopped and sort of lay down flat with its belly on the ground. It leaves the most beautiful impressions in the correct substrate. So, yep, absolutely, they do migrate, and they do turn up in random places, lodge swimming pools and things over the years. So it's not impossible to see a crocodile walking down the road towards you, definitely not. Hey, 40, you're asking, or saying good afternoon, and a very good afternoon to you. Do you think it would ever be possible for a zebra to be born without stripes? Um, I suppose it would be possible. Sometimes you get zebras that have sort of weird looking stripes, or blotches as opposed to stripes due to sort of genetic abnormalities within them, some form of sort of melanism or leucism, which is excessive black pigment or an absence of or less black pigment in the terms of leucism. I don't think I've ever heard of one without any stripes at all. But if you had an albino, I suppose by definition an albino zebra should be completely white with red eyes. But I really don't think it would last very long in that sapping heat. You wouldn't want to be a great big white animal in African sunshine. You would really struggle with thermoregulation, and you would stick out like the proverbial sore thumb to any predators. But I'm sure it has happened. Leucism is an interesting thing. Um, so leucism is it's not a complete absence of melanism. That would be albinism, and it's characterized by the reddish eyes as well, because even people with blue eyes have some melanin in their eyes. So animals are the same. But leucism is just a lot less melanin and dark pigment in the skin, and you find leucistic forms of various animals. I have seen some over the years. I mean, you can, so the white lions are basically, you could describe as leucistic lions. I've seen a leucistic blessbuck, a leucistic eland, a leucistic impala on more than one occasion. So they're not completely white, it's more of a creamy colour, and you can still see evidence of the patterning of the skin. It's just very much more muted, so it's almost like a cream with a dusky cream colour as opposed to completely white. Another question from Canine Girl. You're keeping me on my toes today, Canine Girl. Thank you very much for that. If I understand you correctly, you're asking if an animal can control when they give birth. Now that's a contentious one, because the classic thing that pops straight into my mind is this idea of impala holding back their births, which we don't, well, which we know is not possible. I think to an extent, for the sake of an hour or two here and there, some animals may be able to do so, but ultimately, if that fetus or that baby wants to come out, it's going to come out. They're not able to completely stop the process. I imagine they can sort of withhold it in incredibly stressful situations. If they were fleeing from a predator, they'd probably be okay in order to get to some safety, assuming they can do. My pseudo memory is kicking in and telling me that there is a species of bat, and I'll have to double check this, which is able to sort of pause the developmental process within the womb. I can't remember the specific details, but I do recall there is a bat that can kind of, if the circumstances dictate, normally through environmental circumstances, food availability or temperature and sort of environmental factors, they are able to go into some sort of diapause of the development process. And I want to say could possibly postpone it by up to, a few weeks. But I'd have to double check that. But generally speaking, if that animal wants to come out, that animal's going to come out. This zebra apparently has decided it was all too much work, and has decided after coming out not that long ago, it's going to have a good sleep. It's completely flat out. Brilliant idea. There's one comfortable zebra. Oh, hello, morning. That might have been the most comfortable zebra that I've ever seen. I had one, I remember a while ago in one of the private reserves where I was doing some freelance guiding. A young foal who just took it upon himself to lie down in the road, and we were probably only 5 or 7 meters away from him, and he just lay there and decided to have a sleep right in the middle of the road, completely oblivious to our presence. I don't often see them completely stretched out like that. I think it probably helps it's nice and out in the open. That was rather sweet. Jules in New Zealand saying, good to have me back, and hope you enjoyed my beautiful country. Jules, I most certainly did. I have to say that topographically and visually speaking, it was one of the most amazing places that I've ever visited. I would have loved to have seen more of it during my time there, but it really is mind-blowing. You almost become nonchalant about how incredible the landscape is there, because it's just wherever you go, it's amazing. And it's a bit like being in the bush, I suppose. When you're living and working out there, you sometimes have to just sort of pinch yourself to appreciate what you're seeing every day. And it didn't take long over there in New Zealand as well to just looking in all directions, incredible mountains and rocks. And I'll never forget the colour of those glacial lakes of Tekapo and Pukaki and Benohau and all of those areas there. I mean, that lived long in the memory. Mount Cook in the background. I was able to see Mount Cook from where I was working. Yeah, absolutely spectacular. So, Jules, I absolutely did enjoy your country and the people and the hospitality. It's an incredible place. Pizza Man, you love that baby zebra too. I must suppose he's putting on quite the display. Just Kendra, you're asking whether having less melanin is a mutation of sorts. Well, having read that, I don't like the word mutation now, sort of when it's put in that context. But it's different from the norm, put it that way. So there is what is seen as a sort of a standard amount within these animals of melanin that causes the patterning and the colours of which we are used to seeing with these animals. And sometimes, and it doesn't happen very often, so it is not the norm, animals are born with either an excess of or a lack of melanin in comparison to what they would normally get. And those are given names. We like to pigeonhole things, but there are, of course, various degrees within that. You get some with very little melanin, some with some melanin, some with lots of melanin, so different degrees therein. Ultimately, though, it just comes down to a slightly different genetic coding within that animal, or a recessive gene, it would be another way of putting it, a little bit less information from one set of genes that controls that part of the development. Interesting, that zebra. I'm trying to see if that zebra on the left is actually nibbling on that termite mound or if he was just scratching his chin. You can see the very white, sort of chalky coloration of it there. So a lot of animals do require calcium, and may well be a lot of calcium in the soil there. And we do see quite regularly animals feeding on soil. It's known as geophagia. It's just a way of getting extra minerals um, from the soil. Just see now on the left of shot. I'm interested to see where he's licking or nibbling on that mound. We do see it, I saw it quite a few times up in Madikwa with elephants doing it as well. Not necessarily on such white looking soil as that, but perhaps say that the calcium content within the soil is pretty good there. And all animals need calcium just as we do. Keep your bones strong and in good condition. Classic head to tail posture of those few zebras there, often benefiting from each other's tails to keep the flies away. Love how the little one's resting chins, or they're both resting chins on each other, and gives you good visibility in both directions. Constantly swishing tails. Okay, it sounds like we might have a fairly large animal visiting Rosie's pan. Let's go over there and see what we can find. Our first elephant of the day. Rosie's pan in Oliphants. So we were saying earlier how they tend to sort of scrape away that sort of scummy deposit that tends to build up on these, particularly these smaller water holes. I imagine he's already done so, but we'll see if he does it again. Apparently there may have been some warthogs here as well, but the bigger fish, or the biggest fish in the pond has arrived and vacated. The warthogs have vacated the area, unsurprisingly. A particularly big warthog, this one. Elephants are, they're not great sharers of water as a rule. Interesting, not quite sure what he was doing there. Almost looks as if he was feeling something under the water and then had a look at it and sort of picked it away. We found something in there with his very, very sensitive trunk. Unfortunately, there sometimes are some sort of man-made things that end up in waterholes, and that's a very good time to... Oh, here comes another one. Mention that the 22nd of April is Earth Day, and World Earth are celebrating it with Earth Week from the 22nd right the way through to the 28th of April. And this year's theme is Planet versus Plastics. So do tune in to find out more about the effects, the problems, what is being done to combat this plague of plastics. I hope you'll be able to join us for that. We'll be playing one stunning insert per day of Earth Week, so please do try not to miss that. Don't miss out on those. And just a reminder as well that Monday and Tuesday will see us only going live for the PM drive. The elephant now has decided that drinking is boring, and we're going to much rather have a big mud splash fest. The accuracy of the way that they do toss this mud on them. They don't waste much of it. That's an awful lot of surface area to coat. Think about it, all that mud landed square on his back and just rolled off the sides, giving him a nice even coating. Maybe the marabou storks should be doing that, flicking mud onto their heads with their bills. You'll notice he's probably going to put quite a lot onto his stomach and quite a lot behind the ears. There we go. Good behind the ears keeps damp or keeps moist for a little bit longer because they're generally in the shade. That helps to cool the blood and make thin skin, whereas the veins and the capillaries being much closer to the surface, obviously fanning their ears. And remember that about 70% of the heat and the radiation that we feel on a hot day actually comes from the heat bouncing back off the ground. So you'll find that a lot of these animals will put an awful lot of time and effort into coating their stomachs with mud to protect against some of that heat. Just the same way that a lot of animals that like hot, dry environments or are found in hot, dry environments have white stomachs because that white reflects the heat. As those zebras are an example to some extent. If you compare the plain zebras we were looking at to the Cape Mountain zebras, which do have an awful lot more white on their stomachs, no stripes down there because they spend a lot of time on rocky areas, and those rocks can get extremely hot and radiate huge amounts of heat. What a fantastic way to end another day of fun live at the waterhole. About 5 minutes left, and what a way to spend them. Okay, girl, thank you for your thanks for a lovely afternoon, and yes, some lovely sightings there. Always interested to hear what people's highlights are from what we have been viewing. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and yeah, very chuffed that we can finish the last few minutes with a couple of beautiful elephants here at Rosie's Pan. So I'd be interested to know what people's highlights are of what we have seen. Darkmane Lover, also thank you very much for your thanks, and indeed, yeah, to all the team at Wild Earth and Africam and everybody working behind the scenes to make these shows possible. I will pass on your thanks to them. I'm glad you've enjoyed the afternoon thus far. I do miss elephants. As soon as I get back, they are going to be the one thing that I'm going to be hoping to see more than anything else. Generally agrees, a great way to end the show indeed. But that's the beauty, you never know what you're going to get and when. I'm trying to think my highlights. I think the two highlights, having just thought about it briefly, I haven't been able to go through the entire memory bank of all the things that we've seen. I thoroughly enjoyed watching those warthogs having a good scratch up in at Tau in Madikwe, and that little zebra enjoying life all stretched out also at Tau. I think those are my two highlights that spring to mind. He's been resting his trunk on the floor. Of course, don't forget that trunk can extend at least double what you see there if he really wants us to stretch out all of those little sub-muscles in there. Lots of stories as to how many muscles in an elephant's trunk, ranging from 20 to over 100,000. I think it rather depends on what you characterise as a muscle, but what an incredible appendage that is. Prairie Dog, thank you for your thanks. It has been an incredible afternoon, and I'm very glad to hear that it's made your day. Hopefully we can do the same for you tomorrow. And Claire, you're very welcome as well. I think wisdom is a strong word, my wisdom, but I'll appreciate the sentiments. Thank you. But yeah, we'll do it all again tomorrow. I'm still here for the next 3 days. I'm very excited to see what else we're going to see and discuss. And please do keep sending in your questions and comments. I say by no means have the answers to all of them, but it is great fun to try. And it gives me something to check up on. So I need to still check up on crocodile vision from yesterday. And I'm also as intrigued as the rest of you are, I'm sure, as to why marabou storks don't get incredibly sunburned heads and necks. Unless those necks should normally be white, and that's a good reason that they're red. A lovely view of this elephant. You know what goes through their heads in situations like this? Not really doing anything, not really feeding, just investigating. Just checking stuff out, feeling, probably listening. Just taking a moment. Possibly smelling something on the floor there. He's popped into his trunk and blown into his mouth. The texture of that skin. Spectacular. Well, everybody, we're down to our last 30 seconds or so of the show, so thanks so much for joining me and the rest of the team. And what a great way to finish. I was hoping we were going to finish a beautiful close-up of this elephant bull here. It looks like he's going to exit stage left right on cue. So have a wonderful rest of the afternoon, and I will see you back here tomorrow.